For this video, I'm going to assume that you're a guitar player and that you're a god at playing guitar. But perhaps your keyboard skills suck a bit. So perhaps you want to throw away your keyboard and use your guitar for any synth sounds instead. But then you need to decide, okay, what kind of setup am I going for? And there are two main categories. On the one hand, you have the pitch-to-MIDI systems like the Jamstik or Fishman TriplePlay or the Roland GK systems, or software solutions like JamOrigins MIDI Guitar. Or you have stuff like guitar-shaped MIDI controllers like the Synth Access from the 80s, perhaps the U-Rock guitar that was around for a time, and the Aeroband Guitar nowadays, perhaps also the Starlab guitars, which are really competent MIDI controllers, perhaps not all that guitar-like anymore always, and also the Rob O'Reilly guitars. None of these in the later category are relying on the pitch of the actual guitar being converted into MIDI somewhere down the line. These non-pitch to MIDI controllers really doesn't have the one problem that most guitarists complain about when going from playing regular guitar to using a MIDI guitar setup, and that's latency. Latency can be described as the time-lapse difference from when you pick a note until you hear it. And whereas all MIDI or audio systems have some degree of latency to them, they're not always detectable, and they're definitely not always a problem. But with the pitch-to-MIDI systems, a large degree of players feel unhappy with the time-lapse difference. So speaking from experience, it often manifests as a timing issue. You feel like you come in late every time because you're reacting to the music you hear and then you play. And of course, the little time it takes to convert your pitch into MIDI makes it come in late with the rest of the stuff that you're hearing. So the way to get around this is to play a lot with the actual sounds that you're going to use together with something like a backing track or drum machine or something, so that you're getting used to playing a little ahead of time. But perhaps you can't get over this latency being an issue for you. And then it's a good thing to know that you have these guitar-shaped MIDI controllers to go to. If you're just looking to input stuff instead of the keyboard you just threw away, these guitar-shaped MIDI controllers will absolutely do the job. Let's take a minute here and look at the major differences with inputting a MIDI note with a keyboard as opposed to a guitar. Using a keyboard to begin with, I can create a note by striking the note with different degrees of velocity. So using a MIDI monitor here, you would see what channel am I sending on. You would see the note representing the key that I'm pressing. You would see a note on velocity value, and you would also see a note off for when I'm letting go of the key. And the time between note on and note off is the duration of this note. That's the length of the note in the message that we're sending to any synth. If we look at the MIDI monitor again, you'll see that there's a value after note off as well. That's often referred to as note off velocity or release velocity. In this case, it's a matter of how fast you release the key that is measured in some way. And not all controllers have a dynamic note-off value like this, in the sense that you can actually affect or change that value. Many controllers will just send out a fixed value or a value of 0, depending on how it's been set up. How should we understand this note-off velocity? The faster you release a key, the higher the value. And you can use this value to connect to different functions. So the faster I'm releasing a key, the higher the value, and the faster a synth will stop a ongoing sound. Use the node off to affect the release part of a synth's ADSR, for instance. You can also assign this node off to most everything that you want to affect this way. So if you want to have a sound come in on node off, with the mechanical parts of the keyboard, it's rather straightforward where you want to place a note on and note off message, for instance. You have natural thresholds for exactly when a note is engaged, pressed down, and released. That's not at all the case with the pitch-to-MIDI systems. There are specifically two issues with the pitch-to-MIDI systems that I'm going to take a closer look on in this video. And the first is the latency part, of course. That stems from us using the audio input from the guitar to be converted into MIDI and then sent to the synth. You'll get the feeling that your note on message is a bit delayed from when you pick your note. Here's the other part that differs from the mechanical thresholds of the keyboard setup. The note off. The note off must be assigned to some sort of specific properties in this audio stream that comes from our guitar. And the standard choice, I would say, is for the tracker to send a note off message as soon as the note reaches a 0 velocity value. So as soon as the ringing note no longer has a velocity value, then we're sending a note off message. But it has some major implications for us as guitar players, because the two main ways that we're used to stopping notes from ringing are either lifting our fingers from the fretboard or using our right hand in some way. And I'll show you later that one of these ways to stop notes from ringing is way more preferable than the other one is. I'll talk about this as the whale song effect. So we have this crude division into pitch-to-MIDI systems and guitar-shaped MIDI controllers. But also for the category of pitch-to-MIDI systems, I want to make yet another clarification, because we have a tendency to call everything MIDI guitar. Going forward, I want to point out what I would say is a MIDI guitar on its own and what I would say is something else. Let's start with the Jamstik. Would I call this a MIDI guitar? Absolutely. It has this hexaphonic pickup, so it picks up on each and every one of these strings individually and converts this to MIDI, and it sends it out internally from this guitar. So I don't have to have any other external pedals or anything to actually trigger an instrument from here. If I can connect it with Bluetooth, if I want to use old school MIDI DIN 5, I can use this. It's a mini TRS, and I can use an adapter to go to DIN 5 cable and connect directly to synth if I want to. A caveat here is that I can't use the string envelope for channel pressure or anything else without going into a computer, so I wouldn't be as ready to call this an MPE controller as I am calling it an MIDI controller. If you've used MIDI before, you've probably set up a keyboard to some sort of sound source, a keyboard directly into your DAW or something like this. You might have sent all your information on one channel, having it listen to one input of, say, pitch bend or modulation. Now with MPE, every note gets its own channel with its own pitch bend information and its own modulation information. So it would be like having a pitch wheel and a mod wheel for each note that you're sending. So looking in the MIDI monitor, any new note coming in should be created on its own MIDI channel, and it should have its own pitch bend information. It should have its own aftertouch information, and also possibly its own CC74 modulation information. Let's look at what happens if I connect the Jamstik via Bluetooth. Looking at the Bluetooth connection of Jamstik in the MIDI monitor here, you can see that we have pitch bend, we have the note, and we have a velocity on value, and it's going to be an off value once it reaches 0, I would guess. So if I play D2 and D3 now, you see that we'll get these on separate channels. But what it doesn't send in this case is its string envelope that could be interpreted as aftertouch or CC74. If I were to use the USB-C connection here and connect to my computer, I will get this string envelope, but then I would have to choose between either the aftertouch or CC74. So I can't even get both of these. This is why I'm kind of hesitant calling the Jamstik a full-out MPE controller. What about something like this? The Fishman TriplePlay. If I have a guitar fitted with the Fishman TriplePlay, I would absolutely call it a MIDI controller, no doubt. It has this hexaphonic pickup, and it does its onboard MIDI conversion, and it sends it out so I can use it directly to a synth. But here we might run into some sort of issues depending on how you're setting up, because for me to be able to set up wirelessly to a synth, I need that synth to have a USB host capability, and it's not very often that they do. If I'm going to use that synth's, say, MIDI DIN5 capabilities and the version of Fishman TriplePlay that I have, I need to set up with something like an external USB host connecting via DIN5 cable, but also connecting the dongle to that USB host. So it's not without its issues. And then there's the question of MPE and Fishman TriplePlay. The Fishman TriplePlay was designed to be used in a multi-channel setup with the old MIDI protocol, and it hasn't really adapted to the specifications of this new way of using these channels. I don't think it's impossible in any way, but they just haven't done that. And they also have more stuff than would be able to implement in MPE, according to themselves. I mean, TriplePlay mono mode, they have splits, layers, and hold functions that they want to be able to send as well. You really can't use the CC74 channel for that. So if you want to use the Fishman TriplePlay, you're going to have to settle for the old school MIDI multi-channel mode instead. What about every guitar that has a GK2 or GK3 or GK5 system on it? Like I have a Roland hex pickup on it, and I also have this 13-pin output on it. Is this a MIDI guitar? It certainly looks like one. No, it's not. And the reason for me not calling it a MIDI guitar is just that it has no onboard MIDI conversion done in itself. I need something more for it to work as a MIDI guitar. Connecting it to something like GP10 over here, I can absolutely have it work like a MIDI guitar, but it needs something else for that MIDI conversion. And this is the reason I won't call anything that just have a hexaphonic pickup on it a MIDI guitar. It's not a MIDI guitar in itself. It just becomes a MIDI guitar if you connect it to something else that does the MIDI conversion. So what we could do at this point is to borrow from Godin or from Carwin and call these guitars with Synth Access. But also that might be confusing for anybody who's new to this. It may suggest that these guitars have anything else that isn't just a plain 6 channels of audio, 1 per string out. So I might feel a bit apprehensive and just talk about these as divided pickups or hex pickups when I need to. Now this is the Aeroband guitar. You don't have any strings. This is just silicone, and I guess they have some pressure sensors here. So having tried one of these is actually a fun surprise for me. Is this a MIDI guitar? It most certainly isn't, and you know that it falls into the other category. This is a guitar-shaped MIDI controller. But what about stuff like JamOrigins MIDI Guitar 2 and 3? Those are software alternatives, and obviously those are software alternatives to stuff like this, like the GP10. So these are software alternatives to the external MIDI conversion. With your guitar and the JamOrigin MIDI Guitar software, those two together will constitute something like a MIDI guitar setup. And that's why I'm talking about setups. Setups are combinations of a guitar together with either hardware or software. Now, the interesting part with the JamOrigin software is that you can use it with any guitar that you might have. You just use your magnetic pickup, you connect that to your audio interface and connect your audio interface to your computer, your tablet, or your phone if you want. But there's also this hex tracker version of MIDI Guitar 3 for all of us who already have guitars with hexaphonic pickups fitted on them. Instead of the case where the JamOrigin standard tracker have to extract all this polyphony and all these details from this single input that is your magnetic pickup, we now have these 6 channels of audio that we can use monophonically for a much more detailed result. So you have to have something like the GP10 or the GM800 or some sort of vehicle to pass on these 6 channels of audio that you get from your hex pickup into the computer somehow. So if you use the GP10, it's over USB, but you could also use a breakout cable from your guitar directly and go into your audio interface if you use a multi-channel audio interface. I just want to mention this because this is one of the most competent MIDI conversions we have out right now, and also the only one that delivers a full MPE output. Before I move on, I just want to mention some guitar synths because some of you might be interested just in playing guitar synths. A guitar synth might be a modeling of your actual guitar sound. Like with the Roland systems, you have a more direct connection with the guitar synth sounds because it's a modeling of your actual incoming audio. So it's not converted into MIDI on the way, which makes it more direct, and you will probably get a better play feel directly. So if you're interested in guitar synths, here are some honorable mentions. Paul Driesen's PD Space guitar, for instance. Jonax Roxin on iOS. You have the Maris guitar synth, and of course you have the Roland stuff. So when I'm talking about Roland stuff in this video, I'm only talking about its pitch to MIDI conversion capability. I'm not at all talking about its synth capabilities or any sounds that it makes. I mean, that's a completely another video. This is solely dedicated to the purpose of finding the best MIDI setup using a guitar as a controller for playing or producing. So the idea here is to find the best MIDI guitar setup, whatever that might be. I'm going to deliberately try to avoid the hornet's nest of picking a best setup for everybody. I'm trying to present as much information for you as possible so you can make an informed decision on what would be the best setup for you. If you feel that what you're gonna use this MIDI guitar for is mostly piano stuff, for instance, you're not interested in bends at all, then you should absolutely go for something like these guitar-shaped MIDI controllers that would give you the fastest connection since there is no conversion involved, depending on what kind of connectivity you're looking for. If it's okay for you to just have a Bluetooth connection, or if you don't mind having to use a cable to connect to whatever you're trying to play or control. All of these things matter for you, not for me that much. I know my best setup already. So the thing I'm trying to help you with here is to find what could be best for you. So let's start with going over the problem areas with something like the pitch-to-MIDI systems, because it's not only the tracking. The tracking is one thing. I'm not going to go into the discussion of the tracking for the respective setup, because you probably find a lot of good tips on the respective forums for these controllers regarding the tracking part. The things I'm interested in is the things that nobody else talks about. And that would be stuff like the note off velocity, for instance, having to relearn a bit how to stop notes. And you can't really rely on stuff like palm muting as much, because we use palm muting often to semi-mute a note. This doesn't work in the digital world. You have zeros or you have ones. It's on or it's off. You can sort of approach a muted note by playing the note really short. But that's the only thing you can do. The shorter the note, the more like a muted note it is. But you can't really use stuff like palm muting anymore, because then you'll let some part of the pitch go through, and that will be registered by the pitch-to-MIDI software or hardware, whatever you're using. My personal approach to this, and I don't expect anybody else to follow, it has very much to do with a hybrid picking technique. I was really inspired by Brett Garsed and Gustavo Assis Brazil in the beginning, and I've come to be more and more inspired by Gary Willis from Tribal Tech, his bass playing technique. It's very much an idea where I'm using multiple fingers on the same string. So if I'm plucking a tone, I can dampen it right away with another finger, and going to another string, having another finger ready to dampen it right away there. I can stop a note both with the way I'm lifting up my finger from the fretboard, or the way that I prefer to have another finger ready from plucking and damping, plucking, damping. The big difference from palm muting is that the actual dampening is far more definitive. So I actually mute the note without having any residual ringing from it. So it will be a much more stiff dampening this way. So let's go over to the whale song effect that I talked about earlier. There are two parts to this whale song effect. One is the physical nature of the guitar, and the other one is in the tracker. So the tracker needs some idea of when to send the note off message to a synth. What kind of information in the ringing guitar note is best to use for the assignment of sending out a message to stop the sound to the synth? Traditionally, a note off message is sent at velocity 0. When the sound coming in is reaching a velocity of 0, then the tracker will send out a note off message. But this also means that when I have something like strings running over frets and fretboard, and I use a specific strategy to stop the note from ringing, let go of the string and sort of mute it with our finger. In a MIDI conversion context, once you start releasing the pressure on the finger holding this note, this pressure release will be registered by the software and produce a pitch change. That's not really what you want to do. You want to stop the note, but it's also going to be registered as a pitch modulation of some kind. One way to get around this is obviously to mute the string before you let go of the pressure. So I would advise the same technique that I used before with muting the strings directly rather than the palm muting. Another way is to go to the synth producing these sounds that you're playing and find the ADSR that's involved in the sound shaping and pull back on the release part of this. This will help you mitigate or get rid of most of these wonky pitchy effects. But it's imperative that you know why this is. When we send the note off message to a synth, we're not telling it to be quiet. We're telling it to stop continuing this note. So it's just the initiation phase of the stopping that we're telling it to do. And if it's programmed to have a long release, it's going to keep producing sound. This sound tail will be affected by the pitch in our letting go as well. So the faster this release part is, the better it is for us as MIDI guitarists if we're using a pitch-to-MIDI system. The note-off velocity value can be used for controlling stuff like a longer or shorter release, or it can also be used for triggering completely new sound. So here I go with the Applied Acoustics Systems CV3 Multiphonics, and it's an MPE instrument. But the main reason for me using it here is that I can assign things directly either to the note on trigger or the note off trigger. So in the CV3 keyboard section here, you see note on, off. The upper trigger here is the note on trigger, and this one is the release trigger. So, but we don't have anything connected to the note off trigger, so nothing happens really when I stop a note. But look what happens if I just put one object oscillator in here. Connect that, of course, to the out. And I'll take a release trigger here and move this to the incoming trigger. Look now. So I can combine sounds in this way, and if you're creating new sounds, if you want the sense of a breath or if you want something more plucky, you can just place that on the release trigger in a setup like this. Not all synths have this, but with stuff like Roland's Equator, for instance, you absolutely have access to the release trigger via their lift function. Most controllers doesn't have a note-off velocity value per se. But if we go to something like MIDI Guitar 3, they've just recently started using a release functionality also there. And this is very much a thing that you can influence or affect. You can actually use a modulator inside of MIDI Guitar 3 to affect the note-off velocity that is extracted from the ringing note in the guitar. And this is really an interesting part. Most controllers doesn't use a dynamic version of this note-off velocity value at all. If you look at the Jamstik, for instance, or the Fishman TriplePlay, both of those send a note-off velocity value of 0. But there's a difference with, say, Roland. They send a fixed note-off velocity value of 64. They might use this to provide a slightly better playing experience, getting rid of some of these tails that otherwise might be perceived as pitchy. But on the other hand, Roland have a tradition of cutting their MIDI conversion really, really short, so I'm not sure we even experience any effect of this. With the Roland conversion, you'll experience a very short and non-sustainy play feel. This is just a pitch-to-MIDI problem. It's a more general problem of having introduced a physical instrument with specific qualities to it into an environment it wasn't really made for. But if you feel that you don't want to alter the way that you produce notes, the way that you play, you can also go to the synth and actually pull back on the release part, and you'll get a much snappier sound and you get much less of an effect of this wonky effect from letting go. It will be there, but it won't come through as much. Now there's a third option, and that's to turn off the pitch bends altogether. But in my view, that defeats the whole purpose of using the pitch-to-MIDI system to begin with. The reason why I would choose the obviously more problematic pitch-to-MIDI systems over a guitar-shaped MIDI controller every day of the week is, in fact, the polyphonic bends. The polyphonic bends are what enables a MIDI guitarist to emulate whatever kind of guitar you want. So most of those who I've heard of who sticks with the Roland setups does so because of the simplicity of having these relatively great emulations of guitars. So they have a nylon string on one patch and they have a Strat on another, and they might have a setup with different kinds of pedals within this pedal as well. So they have distorted sounds and clean sounds side by side. Since these are mostly modeled sounds, they're not MIDI. They will have this upper hand when it comes to playability, of course. When you are using the actual sounds that comes from the pickups or microphones on your guitar, you'll also get stuff like pick scratches and all these kinds of stuff. You can do this rhythm stuff that you really can't do with MIDI. So that's an obvious advantage. There's a lot to be said for portability and sturdiness when it comes to the actual setup. But if you're considering stuff like the Roland MIDI out from these boxes, then I can quite confidently say that there are way better alternatives on the market today. Let's start with a note length comparison. And I'm going to use my hexaphonic pickup output straight into the GP10 and straight into MIDI Guitar 3. The same input, but I'm going to split it to both of these. So you can see the GP10 output side by side with the MIDI Guitar 3 output here in my MIDI monitor. There's going to be differences here because the GP10 is not sending out MPE like the MIDI Guitar does. So you'll see something called CP, which stands for channel pressure, which is the after-touch or channel pressure. And you also have CC74, which would be the slide dimension in a Roley setup. So I'm going to play one note at a time, and for how long is this note visible for the GP10 as compared to the MIDI Guitar out? My argument is that the GP10 is cutting their notes really short, and if they're doing so because they want to provide a better playing experience, that's up to you. But if I want to play long, soft notes, for instance, if I want to use a trumpet on very soft dynamics, so I can't do that really if they deliberately are cutting the notes off. So have a look here. Now you see the GP10 and the MIDI Guitar out at the same time. The GP10 has already cut its note off. It did so a while ago, and here the channel pressure is down to 3. Now we have a off. So let's check a higher D. It could be a guitar string effect. It's going to be different. I'm trying the D3 now. And there's the GP10 off. And there's the MIDI Guitar off. So it's obviously much longer notes for the more sustaining lower notes. If I go back to the D2 again. The GP10 is off. MIDI Guitar is still on. There, MIDI Guitar is off. This is just a testament to how different these two systems are when it comes to outputting MIDI from the same input. So I actually think I made my point with this video. I wanted to show you something else than just the latency stuff. And I want to point to the differences between different kinds of setups in terms of how they start and stop notes, how much or how little it takes for you to actually start using these if you want to. I mean, there's always the chance that you think that I'm not telling the truth, for instance, and that there will come a system or setup with zero latency in the future, and you don't have to really bother with changing anything up right now. And feel free to think that. It just might be so that the perfect guitar-shaped MIDI controller is around the corner, and then you would be right. So in the meantime, you have all these things available, like the Jamstik or MIDI Guitar 3 or whatever, but it's up to you to choose whatever you want. And I know that there's obviously much to take into consideration when you're about to do a purchase like this or step into the world of MIDI guitar, for instance. The thing I wanted you to realize is that just by looking at the fundamentals of MIDI creation, and this is true for standard old MIDI and MPE, it really doesn't matter because, I mean, MPE is standard MIDI. It's just a matter of the channel distribution. So you don't have to bother with learning a completely new language. If you learn the fundamental concepts of node on, node off, channel pressure and stuff like this, I'm hoping to at least educate you on some of the things that you need so that you can make yourselves an informed decision on what to buy if you want to buy anything at all. So I'm not telling you to buy anything, but if you want, I hope you learned something. Before I leave, I want to present you with an idea of what I was looking for when I entered this magic world of MIDI guitar. So switch between full presets with different kinds of tunings, with different setups, with different kind of controllers. So if I want a breath controller for something, I'm saving all this to the patches. This is also why I'm not really happy with just something like the GP10 or the Fishman TriplePlay. I have no way of integrating those controllers directly into that setup. For me to use these in a bigger patch, I would need something like Gig Performer or some sort of environment to set these up, just so I can use a foot switch and switch between these patches anyway. This is how I use MIDI Guitar 3. Even if these parts weren't played in direct succession when I recorded them, they could have been. So now I've saved these presets as patches in my setup of choice. I would be able to actually go on stage with this and play these as is, just changing the patches with a switch of a foot pedal.